Hello everyone, my name is Josie and I'm going to discuss my research paper, which is on compliance gaining theory. So first I want to define what compliance gaining is. So Littlejohn and Foss state that it is trying to get other people to do what you want them to do or stop doing something you don't want them to do. And some examples of this in everyday life are teachers trying to get students to comply to their wishes, doctors with patients, parents and children, and even managers and employees. So this is something that many people deal with on a daily basis. So it's a very important research topic. So my research question for this paper was, are aggressive or non-aggressive communication strategies more effective in gaining the compliance of others? So first I want to define what I mean by aggressive communication. I'm going to use the definition of aggressive as boldly assertive and forward or pushy. So using this definition, I would characterize aggressive communication as when a communicator uses bold, assertive, and even rude tactics to gain compliance from others. On the opposite hand, non-aggressive communication is when a communicator takes a more polite and passive approach to compliance gaining tactics. And for the purposes of my study, I will measure effectiveness by the percentage of subjects that actually complied when approached with each type of communication strategy, whether aggressive or non-aggressive. And I'll also discuss this from a biblical worldview, what we can consider effective by the standards of what the Bible says. So my thesis statement, after compiling all my research, was that non-aggressive communication strategies are most effective for gaining compliance in the majority of situations. So that being said, first I want to look at some studies that seem to support the idea that aggressive strategies are more effective in gaining compliance. So the first one is called Honey versus Vinegar, Testing Compliance Gaining Theories in the Context of Freedom of Information Laws. So the method used for this study was that journalists wrote letters using compliance gaining tactics to request access to public records from police agencies and school districts. So it's two separate experiments, one with police agencies, one with school districts, and they sent either friendly, neutral, or threatening letters. And the results of this study indicated that the threatening letter resulted in slightly higher response rates as well as faster response times. So threats are an aggressive communication strategy based on the definition provided. So this would seem to support that aggressive strategies are more effective. But there were some limitations to this study I want to discuss. So there was no verbal communication going on, so we can't determine if the threatening language was verbal, if it would have received the same results. Also, as a very narrow experimental group, it only spanned one state and two types of agencies and one specific scenario. There was also very insignificant variance in response rates between the friendly, threatening, and neutral letters. So there is not sufficient evidence to support the idea that aggressive strategies are most effective across the board. The next study I want to discuss is compliance gaining strategies of individuals experiencing common couple violence. The method used for this experiment was interviews with individuals who had reportedly experienced common couple violence, which actually stems from attempts to persuade and get the other person to gain compliance. So the results of this study indicated that the most common tactic used in these common couple violence situations was power, which is an aggressive strategy that involves exertion of control over the other person. So again, this would seem to indicate aggressive strategies are more effective, but the limitation was that it was not clear whether the other individual in the couple actually complied when these strategies were used. So now I want to discuss a few studies that support the idea that non-aggressive strategies are more effective in gaining compliance. The first one is a cross-cultural test of compliance gaining theory. So Sullivan and Taylor used a questionnaire to ask Japanese managers how often they used different compliance gaining strategies with their employees. And this was kind of a follow-up to a study done on American, Australian, and British managers, where it was found that reasoning, which is a non-aggressive strategy, was used most frequently with their employees. So the results of the Japanese manager test indicated that they used reasoning as well as the most frequently used compliance gaining tactic, which is non-aggressive. So this study supports the idea that non-aggressive strategies are more effective because it looks across several different cultures and different companies, different age groups, so we get a better view of a larger experimental group. Another study I looked at was bringing time into physician compliance gaining research toward a reinforcement expectancy theory of strategy effectiveness. So this article was not actually an experiment that was conducted, but the author Klingel uses a lot of different scholarly sources to support her claim. And she asserts that non-compliance is the result of aversive consequences in the medical field, speaking between physicians and patients. So aversive consequences initially associated with compliance. So her fix for that she suggests is that physicians must arrange to have initial positive consequences, and those can be verbal approval cues or non-aggressive strategies, as we mentioned, to gain that patient compliance. She also indicates that physicians should limit compliance gaining attempts to non-aggressive and immediate appeals in those first initial interactions with patients. So again, in a different field of study, we talked about managers and employees, and now with physicians and patients, this supports the idea that non-aggressive strategies are most effective. Although, as I mentioned, she did not conduct her own experiment. She does back it up with a lot of scholars' works who have conducted experiments, and she suggests experiments to support her claim in the future. The next study I want to talk about is One More Try, Compliance Gaining Strategies Associated with Romantic Reconciliation Attempts. So the method used here was a questionnaire given to students at a university asking what compliance gaining strategies they would use to reconcile with a former romantic partner. So the results of this study indicated that positive compliance gaining strategies such as explanation and referent appeal were dominant for individuals who seek reconciliation. So this looks at another aspect of compliance gaining. We've discussed managers, physicians, and now in romantic relationships, in terms of after a breakup, getting back together with someone, those positive or non-aggressive strategies were used most frequently. Now, obviously, a limitation was that this was a hypothetical situation, so that the breakup and reconciliation did not actually occur, but it still supports my theory of non-aggressive strategies. I also want to discuss effectiveness of compliance gaining from a biblical worldview. So Christians must also consider the motives behind our compliance gaining. So we need to think about if what we're trying to get others to do is in line with God's commandments. Does it serve the other person's well-being and not just our own desires? And so I want to point out that anything that is not honoring to God cannot be considered effective. So if our motives behind compliance gaining are not in line with God's commands and does not serve the other person's well-being as we're commanded to do in the Bible, then I would consider those strategies not effective. For example, in Proverbs 15:1, it says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." And a harsh word is obviously an aggressive communication strategy. And the Lord, who created communication, created us, and created relationships, gave us these commands knowing that these would be the most effective ways to use his gift to us. So in conclusion, my research supports the claim that non-aggressive communication strategies are most effective for gaining compliance in the majority of situations, and that is backed up by a biblical perspective as well. Thank you so much for your time.